Hi and welcome to another session of Power BI Desktop. Today we are going to conclude our all learnings which we have done over previous 10 sessions. Today we are going to start with the best practices, what we've gathered by experience and by different forums and from different groups. Overall, Power BI seems to be the best in place product for developing BI solution for organizational uses. A typical best practices of Power BI would include developer or designer would usually keep his Power BI desktop application updated all the time. This update comes monthly. So it's on the developer or the business user who's designing the Power BI desktop to ideally refresh the Power BI desktop application. This ensures that any fixes in the software application are received well by us. Any new updates, new visualization which Microsoft have integrated with Power BI desktop application are in place and available for our use. At the same time, we need to check that every visualization, be it Microsoft Visual or a third-party app source visual, are up to date. So ensuring all the visuals on all the pages are up to date is one of the tasks, along with the Power BI desktop application to be updated every month. The best practice would also include the number of visuals which we have on our dashboards and reports. So the idea is having minimum number of visuals in the dashboards. For example, for the dashboards, you should have at max about 20 tiles on the dashboard screen. Also, in the reports front, if there are more visuals, it takes more queries to load them and therefore slows down the performance. So an ideal threshold would be around 3 to 8 visuals with at most one grid in place in every page of a Power BI report. Then, to improve the Power BI report performance, we have to remove the unnecessary interactions between the visuals. So what does this mean is every different visuals which is available in Power BI desktop interacts with each other by default. So the onus is on the developer or the business designer to ensure that those dependencies or interactions are ironed out and kept to the minimum levels. This ensures good Power BI performance. We definitely know what the row level security is, and we have to use row level security to limit and protect the unnecessary data being leaked to the end users who are not supposed to have that. At the same time, from the Power BI perspective and the technical perspective, if we have row level security in place, then amount of data which would be flowing from your servers or from the cloud to your Power BI desktop or on the reports and the dashboard would be limited, hence improve the performance. So wherever possible, ensure that use row level security to the maximum. Also, the third-party application source, the app source, which develops brilliant visuals, are certified and kept in App Source, Microsoft App Source. And it's for our benefit to make use of that app source and use them in our day-to-day reports and dashboards. The advantage of using the visuals from the app source would be these visuals are thoroughly tested by Microsoft, so they are as good as the default visualization provided by Power BI Desktop and Microsoft. At the same time, when you do an export to PowerPoint or the PDF of these visualizations, these visuals actually come down well on these export files. Whereas an uncertified Microsoft app visuals which have been imported as a PBIX file and then made use of in your reports and visualization and dashboards would not come in the export feature. So while thinking about the extensibility and the shareability of your reports to the users who do not have access to Power BI Desktop, it's fair to use Microsoft Visuals by default and at max visuals from the app source. Also, If you observe there is a lag and there is a performance delay in Power BI while using the report, please check on the filter mechanism. If there are hierarchical filters which are built on, that is like a cascade filters which is in place, it would be fair them to the minimum usage as possible. At the same time, we provide for the data categorization for Power BI reports, which means high business impact, medium business impact, and low business impact. So for certain kind of data which has a very high impact on the business, the users who are consuming it have to be filtered using row level security, and the numbers have to be accurately reported in the right format, be it charts or the cards having a single number. And accordingly, the shareability should be decided of those reports. One way of doing it would be, we have a common data set which would help us design different reports, and on top of it various dashboards. So with that, a specific report would have only limited set of information which is built on a common data set and would be shared with the person as per the data categorization. Again, the gateway which we used while pushing the data from the data source to the Power BI cloud has to be as far as possible as an on-premise gateway, because on-premise gateway do not take that bandwidth, whereas the personalized data gateway would download all the information, consume the bandwidth, and it would be a cumbersome task to work with a personal gateway dependent on a person. So the ideal way would be an on-premises data gateway to make use of the transport and transfer of data from the data source to the Power BI cloud. Next set of best practices include using different Power BI gateways for direct query and schedule refresh. As you know, when we schedule a refresh using a gateway, it logs the database for the time the refresh is in progress, just to ensure there is no dirty read in the system. At the same time, if there are certain direct query in your visuals and which refreshes data directly using the gateway from the database, then there are cases where the visuals do not render well and it does not show up well on the screen. So the preferred mechanism to get this going is have a separate gateway, one for the schedule refresh and one for the direct query. So when there is a read which has to happen as a direct query, it can parallelly query to the database, and it would ensure that the value is returned back and rendered in Power BI report. So a preferred way of doing things would be keeping the direct query gateway and the schedule refresh gateway separate, speaking to the same data set in the database, and then achieve the purpose of refresh and fetching the data both. Also, testing each custom visual on report for performance to ensure fast report load time, and use an alternative visual if the chosen visual performs poorly. So for every visual which you put on your screen, in there is always a check on the performance of that visual to render the content and basis the volume and the scale of the data. If that visualization renders well and there is no performance lag on your report, then then you can continue using it. However, if there is a problem with the visual which delays the rendering of the content on the screen, then it is ideally advised to change the visual with a similar visual looking visual and achieve the reporting need. Then, avoiding complicated measures and aggregations in the data models. What this means is, when we have measures which are calculated with huge formulas and aggregation done over different data tables in your data source, it is advised that to move these calculations off the Power BI desktop and Power BI space and do these changes, modifications on the data source at the data source level. The idea is all the calculation further the calculation are from the Power BI and closer they are to the data source, the faster is the performance and access of the data. Use slicers sparingly. So, although slicers are the great filtering mechanism on our screen, we've seen it in the demo for so many times that they are one of the ways in which you filter the data onto your desktop. However, every slicer has two parallel running queries. The first data set will bring all the content of the slicer, and the second query would filter the data and then display it. So, as the number of slicers increases, the performance of your Power BI report and dashboard would drastically reduce. Therefore, use slicers sparingly. Ensure that Power BI report and data source are in the same region. With this, we mean that whichever region you select while deploying your Power BI desktop application or Power BI app, please ensure that they are hosted in the same Microsoft geographic region, which the closer the data and the reports are to each other, the faster and is the refreshes and the direct queries and therefore a better performance. Import only necessary fields and tables instead of entire dataset. So a usual practice, while any naive developer or a business designer would do, is bring all the data from the data source onto your Power BI desktop for the convenience of availability of all content and therefore help the designer design the Power BI reports faster. However, if the number of tables are huge, then it leads to multiple problems. One would be the size of the data which is shared over the network during every refresh. At the same time, default relationships being auto-developed in the system during the import, like we saw, is one. And there would be a case wherein a redundant or a non-required or a half-baked table would be used by some other developer using the same Power BI desktop file, therefore causing issues in calculation. So the idea is to in order to reduce the network dependency and the load, to reduce the confusion amongst what table, what measures to use, it is fair to ask the developer or designer to import and use only those content which are ideally getting used in the system and exclude all those data tables and different data sources which are not required in the report. This increases the usage, the performance of Power BI report. Ensure that cache update frequency aligns with the data source refresh frequency. So the settings of cache, which we need to ensure that it is in line with the data refresh frequency. If the cache frequency is lesser than the, if it is higher, in other words, it infrequently updates itself, then there are high chances of data getting displayed in an irregular fashion, leading to confusions.